Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to another Victober video. And today I want to talk about some Victorian authors who I want to read in full. So today I'd like to talk about a few Victorian authors whose work I've really loved so far and who I would like to read everything by one day, or at least kind of all their major works. I kept thinking to myself as I was planning this video that this seems like the kind of video I would have made before, but I don't think I've made it before. I had a look through my channel and I couldn't find a similar video, so I don't think I've made it before. There are quite a few authors who I have already read in full, so I've read all the novels of Elizabeth Gaskell, Charles Dickens, Thomas Hardy, the Brontes, and I think I've probably read all the major works of Oscar Wilde. When I say I've read an author in full, or that I want to read an author in full, I tend to mean, for novelists, all of their novels. Oscar Wilde is a bit different because he wrote across lots of different things. He only wrote one novel, but I have read his novel and all of his plays, I think, and a lot of his poetry and a lot of his short stories and some of his non-fiction. There probably are bits and pieces by him that I haven't yet read, but I feel like I've read the majority of things you can read by Oscar Wilde. For Elizabeth Gaskell, I've read all her novels, but also a lot of her shorter works, and I've also read her biography of Charlotte Bronte. I'm pretty sure I have read nearly everything that you can read by Elizabeth Gaskell. There might be one or two short stories that I haven't come across, but in general, I'm pretty sure I've read nearly everything by her. With Charles Dickens and Thomas Hardy, I've read all of their novels, but there are some other works I haven't read. So I've read quite a lot of Dickens's short fiction, some of his non-fiction, but I haven't read all of his short fiction, but I have read the majority. Thomas Hardy, sort of similar. I've read all his novels, read the majority of his poetry, read quite a few of his short stories, but there definitely are some short stories that I haven't yet read. And then the Brontes, I've read, all their novels and quite a lot of their juvenilia and quite a lot of their poetry, but there probably are bits and pieces that I haven't read. So that's all a long tangential way of saying, when I say I want to read an author in full, or that I have already read an author in full, I don't always mean I've read every single word they wrote. I mean I've read all of the novels, if novels was their main form, or all of the whatever their main form was. That was quite an unnecessarily long explanation, wasn't it? But anyway, I'm not here today to talk about the authors I've already read in full, though I do love them all and would highly recommend them. Today I'm here to talk about the authors that I would like to read in full in the future, authors I have started reading and want to read more from. Some of these authors I'm quite close to reading in full, and some of these authors I'm really near the beginning. Sadly, there is one Victorian author who I'm quite close to reading in full, that I don't think I will read in full, and that is George Eliot. I've read 5 out of her 7 novels, but I don't really like George Eliot's books very much. I gave her a good try. I read 5 out of the 7, but I don't think I like her books enough to read them in full. I think I probably will one day try one more George Eliot, because out of her 5 novels that I have read, I hate The Mill on the Floss with a passion. Probably my least favourite book I've ever read. I didn't really like Adam Bede very much. I don't remember Silas Marner at all. I came to respect Middlemarch on my 3rd read, and I did actually really like Daniel Deronda. So it's possible that out of the 2 George Eliot books I have left, Romala and Felix, Holt the Radical, it's possible one of them might end up being a Daniel Deronda for me and working. And I've also never tried any George Eliot on audiobook. It's now been quite a few years since I read my last George Eliot novel, which was The Mill on the Floss. I have read one short story by her in the meantime, The Lifted Veil, which I didn't really like either, but that was only a short story. So I think maybe come 2027, when it's been 10 years since I read The Mill on the Floss and I have finally got over it, if I ever do, then I think I might try Romala on audiobook. And if I like it, I'll read Felix, Holt the Radical. And if I don't, then I will wait another 10 years and then try Felix, Holt the Radical. So maybe I do want to read all of George Eliot in full, just to say that I've tried. But in general, she's not an author whose books I get on with. I know she's an author who a lot of people absolutely love, but there's something about her writing style and her plots and everything in her books that I just really, really don't gel with. Okay, anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about authors who I love, who I want to read in full. So I have 6 Victorian authors I want to talk about today, all novelists, all novelists who I have really loved so far, and who I want to read more by, and who I would like one day to have read in full. For some of these authors, I have a really clear sense of like how many books I have left, and for others it's quite difficult to work out like how many novels they actually wrote, especially because there are like lots of different lists of novels, and some lists count certain novellas and some lists don't count certain novellas, and sometimes a short story collection ends up amongst the list of novels. Basically what I'm saying is that no one will tell me how many novels Wilkie Collins wrote, and every list I found had a different number with different books included. Anyway, we'll get to Wilkie Collins later. For now, let's talk about the wonderful Anthony Trollope, whose books I am trying to finish quite soon. I love Anthony Trollope. He's a wonderful writer. He is one of my absolute favourite writers of all time. He would be up there with Charles Dickens at number 1, and second place being a closely contested battle between Jane Austen, Elizabeth Gaskell and Anthony Trollope. That is how much I love Anthony Trollope. I have read 42 out of his 47 novels, and I've also read 2 short story collections, and I just love his books. I find his books so warm and comforting and delightful, and just like an utter pleasure to read. Not all of his books are delightful, some have darker themes, but in general he's just a really wonderful writer of social realism and excellent love stories. He writes amazing inheritance plots and unrequited love stories and love triangles, and there's something about the way Anthony Trollope writes that I just absolutely love. Reading an Anthony Trollope book for me is just like so relaxing and delightful. So as I said, I have read 42 out of his 47 novels, which is a lot. I am nearly there. I'm not going to go through every book I've read by him because 42 is a lot, but I will go through the 5 that I have left by him, which are the Macdermots of Ballycloran, the Landleaguers, Castle Richmond, John Caldigate and Marion Fay. I am kind of hoping that I will have finished these 5 books and finished reading Anthony Trollope's novels in full by the end of this year, but 5 books is quite a lot to pack into 3 months, so it might be that I don't quite manage to do it by the end of the year. It did occur to me as I was thinking about this the other day that I would like to make a lot of videos about Anthony Trollope's books when I have finished reading them, and I'm probably not going to do that in January anyway, because there's all the other like January content, you know, goals and favourite books of the year and all that stuff. So I'm probably not going to be making like multiple Anthony Trollope videos until February anyway. So that kind of means I have until the end of January 2026 to read all of his books. That's how my mind works. Anyway, I love Anthony Trollope. I'm looking forward to reading those final 5, and I'd also like to read his autobiography, but I want to save that until I've read all of his books. I'm so excited to finish reading all of Anthony Trollope's novels. I think for some people there would be a bit of sadness at coming to the end of an author's work and not having like a new one to read, but I'm someone who loves rereading, and especially who loves rereading my favourite books. And because I'm someone who finds Anthony Trollope like such a comfort read and such a cosy author, I know that I will love rereading his books, and I can't wait to reread some of my favourites of his. I feel like Anthony Trollope will become an author like Jane Austen, who I just sort of turn to for a reread whenever I like, when I need it, and I think that'll be really lovely. So I'm really looking forward to having read all of Anthony Trollope's novels so that I can start rereading some of them. Not all of them. I don't feel a burning need to reread all of them, but there are a lot of his novels that I would love to read again, and I'm really looking forward to that. Anyway, the next author on my list, no surprise as I already mentioned him, is Wilkie Collins. So I have read 14 out of however many novels he wrote, which is pretty good going. As I said, no one will tell me how many novels Wilkie Collins wrote. I found so many different lists with various books counted as novellas or novels or not included, or whatever. But he definitely wrote more than 20 novels, and I think less than 30. So I am probably about halfway through / more than halfway through Wilkie Collins's novels. And I do want to read everything by him. Now, Wilkie Collins is not an all-time favourite author for me in the way Anthony Trollope is. I find his books exceptionally hit and miss. Some of them I absolutely love and are some of my absolute favourite Victorian books, and some of them I have hated. But I think the thing about Wilkie Collins, and the thing that makes him quite a different author for me to someone like George Eliot, is that I love his writing style. So even when I have a problem with his book, the problem is usually with the plots or like the way he presents his female characters, which sometimes drives me mad. And sometimes he just makes terrible narrative decisions. But anyway, I feel like when I have a problem with Wilkie Collins' books, it's always to do with the content of the book and not to do with the writing style. So even when I'm really cross with what he's doing with the story, I'm still having an enjoyable reading experience because I love the way he writes, and I find the way he writes really, really easy. And that's very different from an author like George Eliot, where I have problems with her plots and her narrative decisions and which character she chooses to focus on, but also I just find her writing really, really hard to get through. So even though Wilkie Collins is a very hit-or-miss author for me, I still want to read everything that he wrote because I always get a certain amount of enjoyment out of the reading experience because I like his writing. Also, I feel like, you know, my favourite George Eliot book is Daniel Deronda, which I really like, but that would probably be like a 4-star read for me. Like, it wouldn't be an all-time favourite. Whereas my favourite Wilkie Collins books, I absolutely love. Like, the hits are so high that I feel like I need to read all of his novels to make sure I find all the hits, because what if I miss a really, really good one? So I don't mind reading the misses in order to get to the hits. Brief sidebar in what is definitely going to be a much longer video than I initially intended. The other day, I came across a quote from a letter from Geraldine Dewsbury writing to a friend talking about the Wilkie Collins. And I really enjoyed this letter because it kind of summed up like how hit and miss Wilkie Collins can be, and it was good to know that I wasn't the only one. So this is what she said to her friend. One day last week there came Hide and Seek by Wilkie Collins. Get it and read it. It is the most lovely story I ever remember to have read. It left me feeling inclined to pitch every sheet I had written of my own into the fire. Please get Hide and Seek. I don't know whether I did most laughing or crying over it. It is so pretty and so healthy in its nature. I'm sure Wilkie Collins must be a good man, though he did once write that atrocious Basil. And this just really made me smile because I definitely think that I sat there after having read, for example, Man and Wife, which is fantastic, and thought, yes, Wilkie Collins, you are a good writer, though you did once write that atrocious Basil. Although I don't actually like Hide and Seek that much, and it's definitely not a healthy book. Like, I don't know what Geraldine Dewsbury thinks is healthy, but there are some very exceptionally unhealthy things in that book. Anyway, so I have read, as I said, 14 books by Wilkie Collins, 13 novels and 1 novella, I think. At least I think 13 of the books I'm about to name are often counted in lists of his novels, and one of them isn't. So anyway, I have read Basil, which was a miss for me. I did not like that book at all. Hide and Seek, which was also probably a miss for me. I really enjoyed it until the ending, and then I don't know what the hell Wilkie Collins was doing. A Rogue's Life, which was fine. The Dead Secret, which was fine to pretty good. The Woman in White, which is fantastic. Highly, highly recommend it. No Name, which I think was pretty good. I feel like I need to reread No Name because I feel like I quite liked it, but I didn't like it as much as everyone else seems to. And I feel like maybe it could do with a reread. Armadale, which is a massive hit. I think that book is fantastic. The Moonstone, another wonderful hit. I love that book so much. Probably my favourite book by Wilkie Collins. Man and Wife, another hit. I thought that was fantastic. Poor Miss Finch, another hit. Really enjoyed that one. The Law and the Lady, probably a hit. Not quite as good as some of the ones I've just named, but a really strong book. And then I've also read The Two Destinies, which just is the biggest miss of all the Wilkie Collins books. I don't know what Wilkie Collins was thinking, but I hate The Two Destinies. What on earth was he thinking with that ending? I don't know. I've also read Jezebel's Daughter, which was pretty good. I don't have any problems with it, but it's not a favourite. And I've also read The Frozen Deep, which was, again, fine. The Frozen Deep is a novella that is a novelisation of a play that Wilkie Collins wrote with Charles Dickens. So it's a bit of an odd one, and I think that's probably why it doesn't end up that often in lists of Wilkie Collins's novels. So I have many Wilkie Collins novels left to read. The ones I have left to read are, I think, the following, but I may have some things missing, and some of these may actually not be novels because, you know, as I said, it's quite hard to find a proper list of Wilkie Collins. So there is Antonina or The Fall of Rome, The Queen of Hearts, The Haunted Hotel, which is maybe short stories, I'm not 100% certain, The Fallen Leaves, The Black Robes, Heart and Science. Heart and Science is pretty high on my list. I'm very keen to read this soon. I Say No, The Evil Genius, which is also high on my list, mostly just because of the title. Excellent title. Then The Guilty River and The Legacy of Cain. Then there's also Ioláni, which wasn't published during Wilkie Collins' lifetime. I don't think it was published until the 1990s, so I guess it's like a recovered manuscript. So I kind of don't know whether I would feel the need to have read that to consider myself having read Wilkie Collins in full. I'm not sure. Anyway, and there's also 2 books which I think are novellas, but I do kind of want to read, and they are Miss or Mrs, which I've heard really good things about. Maybe that's top of my list, to be honest. And also the new Magdalen, which I've heard good things about too. Then the next author I want to read in full is Amy Dillwyn. So I love Amy Dillwyn's books a lot. I think she's a fantastic writer. She is a less daunting prospect to read in full than some of the authors on this list, because she only wrote 7 novels and I've already read 3 of them, all of which I loved. So I've read the Rebecca Rioter, A Burglary, and Jill. Jill is my favourite, but the other 2 are fantastic too, and I love the way Amy Dillwyn writes. I find her books really, really readable, really accessible, really fun, really fascinating thematically. She likes to write quite unconventional stories. Jill, for example, is the story of a young lady who runs away and becomes a servant because she's bored. Jill is everything a Victorian woman is not meant to be. She lies and cheats and steals and cares much more about money than she does about marriage. She's also clearly in love with the woman that she works for, and she's just a delight to read about. I love Jill so much. As I said, Amy Dillwyn only wrote 7 novels, so I have 4 books by her left to read. Chloe Argyle, Nant Olfcher, Jill and Jack, and Maggie Steele's Diary. I don't know which of these I will read next. Maybe Maggie Steele's Diary, something about that appeals to me. I'm slightly wary of reading Jill and Jack. I think because it's a sequel to Jill and I love Jill so much. And it seems that Amy Dillwyn wrote Jill and Jack partly because reviewers had really wanted a sequel to Jill, and what I don't know is whether they wanted a sequel to Jill because they loved Jill, or whether they wanted a sequel to Jill because they weren't satisfied with the ending of Jill. And I'm just slightly worried about Jack and Jill, but I also really want to read it, so we'll see. Those are the novels I have left to read by Amy Dillwyn, but I would also kind of love to read her diaries, and I think I might be able to get hold of them. There is an edition of her diaries in print, but you have to send a letter to a university in Wales to ask for a copy. So I might do that because I find Amy Dillwyn fascinating as a writer, but also as a person. She was a really interesting person. She was a queer woman. She was an industrialist. She was a businesswoman and a social reformer, and she liked to wear men's clothes and smoke cigars. Amy Dillwyn was all about breaking the boundaries of Victorian society, and I think she would be fascinating to read more about. So there we go. Okay, next author. The next author I'd like to read in full is George Gissing. I have read 6 George Gissing novels, and I think he wrote 23, one of which I think is unfinished. So George Gissing did write quite a lot. I do have quite a lot left, but so far I've loved everything I've read by him. Well, except The Whirlpool, which was not so good, but the other 5 books out of the 6 I've read by him I loved so much that I'm really keen to read everything by him at some point. George Gissing is a late Victorian writer who I often like to describe as the urban Thomas Hardy, because I think his books have quite a lot in common with Thomas Hardy's, though they are in general in a quite urban setting, often set in London. In George Gissing's novels, you can expect to find a lot of misery, a lot of poverty, a bit of socialism, a bit of feminism, and a lot of absolutely fascinating, well-drawn characters and incredibly poignant moments. I love George Gissing a lot, and I think he's a really interesting writer. So as I said, I have read 6 novels by him so far. I've read The Unclassed, The Netherworld, New Grub Street, The Odd Women, Eve's Ransom, and The Whirlpool. The Whirlpool I didn't love. That's not my favourite of his books, but the other 5 I thought they were all fantastic, and especially The Netherworld, New Grub Street, and The Odd Women are just amazing books that I would highly, highly recommend. So I have quite a lot of books left by him to read. The 2 that are sort of top of my list that I am the most keen to read are Workers in the Dawn and Demos. Demos is on my TBR for this Victober, and then the other books by him I have to read are Isabel, Clarendon, Thyrza, A Life's Mourning, The Emancipated, Denzil Quarrier, Born in Exile, In the Year of Jubilee, The Paying Guests, Sleeping Fires, then The Town Traveller, The Crown of Life, Our Friend the Charlatan, The Private Papers of Henry Rycroft, Veronilda, and Will Warburton. And I think Veronilda is unfinished. So I am excited to read all of these. I feel like I'm less excited to read the later ones. So The Town Traveller is the book after The Whirlpool. And I think I'm generally a bit worried about the books after The Whirlpool because I found The Whirlpool very bitter. Like, it just had quite a different tone from his earlier books. And I feel like maybe the books George Gissing wrote when he was younger are books I'm going to enjoy more than the books he wrote later on in his life. So I will probably start with his earlier books and at some point work my way up to his later books, but we will see. The next author I want to mention is Dinah Mullet-Craik. I have read 3 of her novels and 1 novella, and I've really enjoyed what I've read by her so far, especially Olive, which is my favourite book by her, but I also really love John Halifax Gentleman. And then the other two things I've read by her while I'm going through them anyway are A Noble Life, which I thought was pretty good, and An Old Governess's Tale, which is a novella that is really, really interesting, historically fascinating. Don't start with it because there is a lot of racism in it. And it is a story that fights back against that. Part of the plot of the story is about the main character learning that her prejudices are wrong, but it's not a very easy read. So worth a read, but don't start there. Start with Olive, I would say. Anyway, Dinah Mullet-Craik is a really interesting author. So she wrote for both children and adults. She wrote poetry, novels, and novellas, and she writes really fantastic characters and really interesting character relationships, really interesting friendships and love stories. She also writes a lot about disability in a way that I think is really, really interesting and much more complicated and nuanced than presentations of disability you sometimes find in other Victorian books. Olive, John Halifax Gentleman, and A Noble Life all deal with a protagonist who is disabled, and disability as a theme is looked at really, really interestingly in her books. It's a bit hard to find a list of Dinah Mullet-Craik's novels, especially because, as I said, she wrote novels and novellas, and she also wrote for both adults and children. I would like to read some of her children's books, but I'm probably more focused on her adult books. As far as I can see, I think she wrote 15 novels for adults. So the ones I have left to read are The Ogilvies, The Head of the Family, Agatha's Husband, A Life for a Life, Mistress and Maid, Christian's Mistakes, Two Marriages, The Woman's Kingdom, A Brave Lady, Hannah, Young Mr. Jardine, and King Arthur, Not a Love Story. I kind of want to read King Arthur, subtitle Not a Love Story, because I'm fascinated. But I think actually top of my list are probably Agatha's Husband and A Life for a Life. A Life for a Life I know starts with a murder, so I'm quite curious about that. I've also heard good things about Mistress and Maid, I think. And I kind of want to know what The Woman's Kingdom is about. So those are her adult novels, and I would like to read them in full. I would also like to read some of her children's books. I think I'm probably less excited to read them in full, but there are some I would like to read, and I'm especially interested to read her children's book, The Little Lame Prince and His Travelling Cloak. As I said, Craik often writes about disability and has good and complicated disability representation, so I'd be quite interested to read that one. And then finally, we have J. Sheridan Le Fanu, another author I would like to read in full. So I've read 3 of his novels so far, and I think he wrote 13 novels, but he also wrote a lot of novellas and shorter works, and as I said, sometimes what counts as a novel or a novella is complex, so the number may be wrong. And I have also loved some of the shorter works I've read by him, so I would probably like to read his novels plus lots of his shorter works too. And he wrote across quite a lot of different genres. He wrote sensation fiction, historical fiction, lots of gothic stuff, and in general, everything I've read by him so far has just been great, and not only really readable and enjoyable, but also really thematically interesting, really exciting and dramatic. You can see a lot of the sort of precursor of the modern thriller and the modern horror novel in the works of J. Sheridan Le Fanu, and I love his stuff. So far I have read, as I said, 3 novels by him. The House by the Churchyard, which is a historical novel, Uncle Silas, which is a gothic Lockram mystery novel, and Wilder's Hand, which is a sensation novel full of family feuds and disappearances and so much more. And I've also read Carmilla, which is a vampire novella by him, and some of his short stories. And I have lots left to read, and I'm excited for them all. So I think most of these are sensation novels, but some of them are historical. So there's The Cock and the Anchor and The Fortunes of Colonel Tolof O'Brien. I think those 2 are historical. Guy Deverell, All in the Dark, The Tenants of Mallory, A Lost Name, The Wyvern Mystery, Checkmate, The Rose and the Key, Willing to Die. What a great title. I love the titles of Victorian sensation fiction because I find them all so ridiculous in such a wonderful way. Then I would also kind of like to read The Chronicles of Golden Friars, which are short stories or novellas, I think. There's also various other gothic and ghost stories, and I've got a collection on my TBR for this Victober. And I also want to finish reading In a Glass Darkly, which is a collection of short stories and novellas. So Carmilla is from that collection. I've read that. I think Green Tea, which I've read, is also from that collection, but I haven't read everything in that collection, and I would like to. So at some point I would like to read everything by J. Sheridan Le Fanu, because so far I've just really, really enjoyed his work. He just writes really great stories, really fun, adventurous gothic sensation delight. So there we go. Those are a few Victorian authors who I would like to read in full sometime. I'm sure there are other authors who I might one day like to read in full. You know, I love Margaret Oliphant, for example, and I've read 7 of her novels and quite a few of her short stories so far, but she did write 99 novels, so... you know, some of the Victorians were very prolific. Mary Elizabeth Braddon too. I've read 3 of her books and liked them all, but she wrote a lot. I think she also wrote like more than 100 books. So will I ever read all 99 of Margaret Oliphant's novels? Maybe I'll get through these authors first before I move on to the mammoth project that would be reading all of Margaret Oliphant. So yeah, I hope this has been a fun video. Do let me know down in the comments what Victorian authors have you read in full? Would you like to read in full? That's all for now. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.